Good evening, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome back to the Slingerland Structured Literacy 3-part webinar. This evening, we are presenting part 3, titled Structured Literacy, Deep Dive into the Principles of Instruction, How It is Taught. Before I introduce the presenter, though, let's walk through just a couple of reminders. This is a 90-minute presentation, and we're also broadcasting on YouTube. I have muted and video blocked everyone, so right now only the presenter will show. We ask that you stay muted and blocked throughout the presentation. It's going to allow you a little time to bend and stretch and flex and move during the time. We do hope to have time for question and answers at the end of the session. During the session, though, please post your questions in the chat box as I'll be collecting them and having the presenter go through the questions at the end of the session. And if there are any left over after our allotted time, Dr. White will provide feedback at a later time. Thanks for attending, everybody. Now, to introduce our presenter, Dr. Nancy Cushion-White. Nancy Cushion-White is a clinical professor at the Department of Pediatrics, Division of Adolescents and Young Adult Medicine at University of California, San Francisco. Over the past 40 years, she has taught students in general and special ed classrooms at public and private schools. She's provided psychoeducational assessment and literacy intervention. She's trained pre- and in-service teachers and practitioners and developed curricula and been involved in policy. She's piloted a San Francisco Unified School District Special Day School for 2E, twice exceptional students who were gifted with a diagnosis of dyslexia. She's also taught young adults in a pretrial diversion program through the San Francisco Superior Court, the Mentor Court Division. She is a certified instructor of teaching for training teachers in the Slingerland multimodal structured language approach. A past member of the board of directors of the International Dyslexia Association, Nancy serves as editor-in-chief of IDA's online newsletter, The Examiner.
The ideal, so let's talk about this first, because in the ideal world, this is what we heard from the COVID task.
Sorry.
What was that?
Yeah, like some sort of an interruption, so I had to remute everyone.
Okay.
Nancy continues to publish, present workshops, and work on numerous boards and advisory boards, such as the Northern California branch of IDA and the AB 1369 Dyslexia Guidelines Writing Group with the California Department of Education. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you.
And
okay,
it's all yours.
So welcome, everyone. It's nice to see some people I recognize and nice to meet some people that I haven't met yet. So tonight we're taking a deep dive. Wait a second, I think I'm supposed to, yeah, okay. A deep dive into, well, this isn't good. I'm not at the beginning. Okay. A deep dive into the principles of instruction. And these are the questions I'm going to try to answer. But as I was putting this presentation together, a lot of questions came up about things that we do in the Slingerland approach, and I'm sure in some of the other structured literacy approaches also, that are really important, have been supported by research, but we don't necessarily always mention them. So I'm going to try to go quickly and thank Ruth Nelson ahead of time for noticing quite a number of typos in the handout. So you will get a corrected copy of the handout. I'm not sure when, but in the next few days, next week, I think. So thank you to Ruth and thank you to Elise for that. So these are the questions we're going to get to. In the meantime, just thinking about learning theory. Marilyn Adams, most of you know her work from the 1990 beginning to read, thinking and learning about print, but she's continued to do her research. And basically there are several things where it's not going to go the way I want it to. Okay, so concepts and knowledge. Once we get to that point, it's interconnected bundles of features. It's not just separate facts. There we go. So the learning is happening when we make new connections and we generalize those and apply them. And the more generalization we're able to do and the more application means that when we come to a novel problem that we don't even necessarily, we haven't been taught that it relates to what we've learned to do or this new knowledge, that we can use that knowledge to solve the problem. And that's when learning can be really useful. So the quality of knowledge is the depth and the richness and the detail. So is it just that you have memorized something because you have some mnemonic that's not at all related to what it is? I mean, we've all done that. I know the parts of a tooth because I learned them according to a tune. I don't need to know that anymore, but it's still in there, but there's no depth to it. So the richness and the depth based upon the questions that the kids ask or how the kids relate it to what they're learning or a word that they want to learn more about. So that, and the precision is important. And all of those things strengthen the associations and then through practice and application. So how does it happen? Teach to the intellect, de-emphasize rote memorization. Make sure our kids understand what it is we want them to remember. How many of us can remember things that we don't understand? I certainly can't. So in a nutshell, Marilyn says, the way we learn new things, all new things, is by tying together parts of things we know already. So we're constantly connecting it to what we already know. Now, this is from 1998. It was testimony by Reed Lyon to the US Senate Committee on Labor and Human Resources. And he says 5% are going to learn to read on their own. They're not the ones that we're worried about. However, I'm sorry to admit that those were the ones I knew how to teach or thought I knew how to teach because they could learn in spite of me and didn't need me anyway. So let me give you an example. This is a 4-year-old, and you see, and I will tell you that this piece of cardboard was discovered in a crock pot that his family obviously hadn't used for about 15 years. And out of the crock pot came this piece of cardboard. And here we see the 2 giraffes are innocent. I have no idea what the giraffes were accused of. I don't know if they were guilty or not. That's not why I'm showing it to you. I'm showing it to you because this 4-year-old who never had anybody taught about concepts of print, he got to this word. He started to write giraffe, perhaps because it was challenging for him to spell. He forgot to leave the space, but he had only written the G, so he crossed it out. He wrote giraffe, only has 1 F, but it's pretty good for a 4-year-old. He left a space, wrote R, started thinking about innocent, forgot to leave the space, but didn't realize it until he'd written the whole word. So this says, I don't know whether you can tell, but that's a little, it's space, it says space. So he realized, oops, I was supposed to leave a space there. Now, again, no one taught him that, but he knew it. So, but still, it's not magic. Even that 5% of children who learn to read without explicit instruction are employing specific reading behaviors. So they learn them either from their exposure to print, and they seem to be prone to be able to do that without instruction, but they still learned it and they're using the behaviors. That's the statistical learning that we're hearing a lot about. Okay, so back to the Reed Lyon testimony. 20 to 30% will learn to read relatively easily once exposed to formal instruction, and it really doesn't matter so much what that will be. If you think about the National Association of National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's about the 30% that are proficient. 60% will find learning to read to be difficult without direct, systematic, explicit instruction, an example being structured literacy. And 20 to 30% of those, in other words, 20 to 30% of that 60% will find learning to read to be one of the most difficult challenges they will ever face. And they must have explicit, systematic, direct instruction if they're going to learn to read. So the challenge, those National Assessment of Educational Progress scores, that 35% of 4th graders are reading below basic. When children begin school, we don't know with sufficient accuracy which will struggle to learn to read without explicit systematic phonics instruction. We can do screenings which give us an indication of the students who are most at risk, and we can give them tiered instruction. But if we're going to do that, We need to make sure that the tiered instruction is direct, explicit, and systematic, especially at those lower levels. So the most ethical and prudent action is to provide all children with the most effective teaching methods, whether they need them or not, based on the best available evidence, thereby accelerating the progress of all of them and minimizing the likelihood that any child will struggle to learn to read. And kids who don't need, in other words, those who would survive without that, still are learning things that are very useful that they can, maybe they would have figured out a lot of it intuitively, at least the 5%, but it's still information that they find interesting because they find learning interesting. They're curious learners. Okay, so pre-service. Okay, we need to product proof our teachers. A product, any product, no matter how good it is, how evidence-based it is, can only be as effective as the teachers who are using it. Last time when we met, we talked about the importance of the content and how it really makes a difference if teachers understand the content of instruction, which in this case is the English language. That's why pre-service and in-service training are so important, because that's where they can get the content knowledge, and that's where they can get the information about what is evidence-based in terms of principles of instruction. Anytime you read an ad, it's going to tell you, and most everything is going to say evidence-based or research-based, but you need to know what the research was and how to read it. So Margie's advice to us about product proofing our teachers is not a bad idea. Instructional time. Students who are behind don't learn more in the same amount of time as students who are on track or ahead. So the students who are behind need more explicit, more systematic, and more instruction and practice. We talked about the fact that dyslexia, for example, as a language-based learning disability, is on a continuum, and there are some that are more and there's some who are less affected. Just like everybody else, every person with dyslexia has a slightly different pattern of learning strengths and weaknesses, but they all benefit from English, being taught the structure of the English language. So effective classroom management. Students don't learn if they're not connected and focused on instruction. And there's a lot in your handout, and I've graded out, so I won't be tempted to talk about it. That's for me, more for you, but you have it in the handout. And if there's anything that was a typo, it'll be fixed when you get the update. Effective teachers are also effective classroom managers. And why? What are our goals? Increasing time on task, decreasing off-task behavior, and increasing academic achievement as a result of the first two. So these classroom management techniques, I'm only going to give you I'm not going to go through any of the details here. I'm just going to say that one is group opportunity. These are just shorthand for group opportunity to respond. That means the teacher asks a question and the entire class responds, either verbally or non-verbally, but everybody's involved and expected to be doing something. It's not, if you have 20 kids, 19 of them aren't on vacation while somebody else is taking their turn. Individual opportunity to respond. In our Slingerland classes, we have the student teacher, who's the person who's called on to specifically answer the question, but every single other person is expected to respond also in every way, including writing, except not saying it out loud, still even moving their mouths. And then behavior specific praise. That's praising when you catch them doing what you want them to do, praising them and telling them that you are pleased to see that they're doing whatever that thing is. It's amazing how that can work. So all those are important, and there's plenty more to read than what I just said. So prompting for expectations, that means letting them know if they don't know what you expect, they can't do it. But when they know what to expect, kids are going to bend over backwards for the most part to do what their teachers want them to do. Not always the same for parents, but at least for their teachers. So eliciting responses, why does it matter? Eliciting response means you ask a question and you don't just, if the student doesn't say anything, then you ask another question to give more scaffolding or more support. You don't tell them the answer. But again, the reason for doing it is to increase time on task, increase academic achievement, which decreases off-task behavior. And the goal is equal opportunity and responsibility for every student to respond. elicit, elicit, elicit. Do not just give the answer. Help your students know what they know. And this is a story of it was the first day of a high school class many, many years ago in the summer. And a student asked me a question, and rather than just tell him the answer, I asked him other questions in hopes of eliciting, making him realize that he knew the answer by asking him questions and pointing out places that he could look. And it really annoyed him. He was really annoyed. He was so annoyed that before he left for break, he told me that I had been disrespectful to him. So, well, I'm not used to hearing that. And I was very dismayed to know that he felt that way. So I talked to him after school and I explained to him, said, from my point of view, I was being respectful rather than disrespectful because I knew that you knew more about what you were asking than you realized. And I was trying to help you know what that was. And he thought about it. Of course, all weekend I worried that he was going to not come back on Monday. And when I finally called and talked to his mother, she said, oh yeah, he came home, explained the whole thing. He understands. So he did understand and he got it. And he didn't feel disrespected after that, but I needed to make sure he understood. And then sometimes a student asks a question in a class or even in a one-to-one situation. And when you first hear the question, it may not be immediately apparent as to why the question was asked or how it relates to what you're doing. And you can't assume that the question isn't related. It might not be, but most of the time, if you probe far enough, you realize that it was a really good question. Answering it might be useful not only to that student, but to others. But in order to do that, sometimes you have to ask more questions to the student to get at exactly what he was asking. And often the result is enriching both for the teacher and for the student who asked the question, as well as the other students in the class if it's a group. Okay, so back to our questions. You have, again, I know you've gotten it all 3 times, but Carolyn Cowan's infographic for structured literacy, this time the principles of instruction, which you see listed here, and we're going to go through them. So principles of instruction: direct explicit, structured systematic, cumulative sequential, multisensory or multimodal, diagnostic. Evidence-based instructional principles guide teaching of structured literacy content. The content is what we focused on the last time. So direct and explicit means direct teaching of all concepts with continuous student-teacher interaction. It's not just telling, but explaining something, modeling something, and then having the student show you what he or she knows based upon what you've just presented. Active learning, that means in a group, every student is taking every turn, either as the student teacher or as an active learner, so that if you have 10 students or 12 students or 15 students, every kid is taking every turn. And then you also know if somebody is not with you because you can see that they're not doing what they need to do. Learning is never assumed. We don't assume that they know something, but I'm going to give you an example in a couple of seconds, which shows you what happens when you might have over-assumed. All concepts, skills, and procedures are deliberately taught, and the gradual release of responsibility, where the teacher models, verbalizing each step, then guides the student to demonstrate and verbalize the steps. You want the students to use words to say what they're doing, because it helps to get the procedure into their long-term memory so that they can practice it when you're not there, which of course is our goal. It's always, always our goal is for independent functional use. If our students can only do what we're teaching them when we're there, we haven't done our job. So this is the Beth Slingerland's gradual release of responsibility model. Again, emphasizing the verbalizing, where you tell them, and I'm going to do that in a minute with a couple of procedures, where you tell them, you show them what to do, and you use words to say what you're doing. Then you have a student do the same thing, using his words or her words to explain. And ultimately, you might get to where the class is practicing, but you're still guiding, checking, and you want them to verbalize as needed. Sometimes they won't be verbalizing at that point. They'll be just moving their mouths. Sometimes they'll be doing it inside their head. Then they practice more independently, again, using verbalization as needed, and the goal always independence and functional use. This is the more modern version of it. I will say that I do, we do, you do it together, you do it alone. Yes, that's a model and it's very, very popular, but you need to, as the teacher, you need to be really on top of what every student is doing, not just standing and watching them as a whole, but going around and listening. You don't want them to practice mistakes. And you don't want, in a paired situation, to have one student doing all the talking and the other one not, because the one who's not probably is the one who needs to do it even more. Nothing succeeds like success. So again, emphasizing that continuous student-teacher interaction, constant questioning. Okay, this is an example. Many years ago, it was during one of our summer schools, and we had kids had breaks at different times. And when my class was having a break, one of the other teachers asked if I would come in and present the half-long unstressed vowel phoneme concept. She wasn't as confident of that as she wanted to be, and she just wanted me to do the first presentation for her to watch. And so I went in and I asked her what they'd already done and what they knew. And so I went in thinking with that information. But I realized when I started asking them some questions, that some of those things they didn't know very well. So I had to keep going, moving backward until the point where they really, really totally understood everything I was asking and everything I was saying. And then we practiced at that level, and then we moved forward again. But it would have been it would have been terrible use of all of our time if I had tried to go ahead and talk about that half-long unstressed vowel phoneme concept if they didn't really have the background knowledge and the prerequisite understanding that they needed in order for it to make sense. Another example is, well, it was similar to, okay, deep questioning to probe a degree of understanding. Again, this was many years ago, and it was a student. And when you teach a concept, you have all kinds of things that you're teaching. And sometimes the student will tell you exactly what you think you need to hear for him to understand. For example, he spelled a word. Suppose the word was stack, like to stack some blocks, stack. And he had encoded the word. He chose CK to spell the K in stack. I asked him why. He said, because it comes right after a short vowel sound. And I'm thinking, oh, great, he knows that. And then I said, what short vowel sound does the K come right after in the word stack? And he looked at me a little puzzled. And then he said, S. You may not be able to hear that, but that was the phoneme associated with the letter S. And of course, not only is that not a short vowel sound, it's not even a vowel. So clearly he was not as clear on that concept as I thought he was. And the fact that he could say it comes right after a short vowel sound didn't mean he really knew what all the short vowel sounds were. So again, you have to be constantly checking to be sure that they know what we think they do. Every student given an opportunity to respond, but every student's responsibility is to respond. And I'm not saying that you would ever embarrass a student. If I ask a question and the student can't answer it, it's my job to make sure, it's my responsibility to provide success in his response. So I need to keep asking him questions until he can respond correctly, and then we move forward. So in the end, he's learned something, and I've learned something about what he knows and what he doesn't know. And he's going to be more confident the next time because he knows what that was. And that means we have to plan. So of course, when we plan, we're planning. If I have a list of words and I'm teaching a group, that list of words is teaching a concept, but each of the words is chosen for a specific student because I know what each student needs to practice, what they know, or I think I do. Sometimes I find out I was wrong. But in that case, again, you provide the scaffolding to ultimately elicit the response. If you just tell them, then they think I got it wrong, or I didn't know it. But if you keep going, they might think you're annoying sometimes because you keep going. But in the end, they feel better because they're learning. So as you saw last week, this is the Slingerland lesson plan. And I'm going to do a little demonstrating of how these principles are put into practice. And you're going to actually see a sample, and you're going to see review of letters previously learned. Actually, it's teaching and practicing letter connections. It's the one that should be highlighted. And you're going to see phoneme, what he wrote for his written phoneme grapheme practice, what he wrote for words and in encoding and spelling. And this is a high school student, and it's advanced. This was a student on day 11 of a 4-week summer school. And so you see at the top, I hope you can see something besides what I can see, which is the bar with all the choices, but you should be able to see capital TH. You see some letter connections. These were connections that I anticipated he or the students in that group may have difficulty with: the WA high connection, the OD high connection, the M with the 3 downstrokes, the N with the 2 downstrokes, and that was a capital letter, which we practiced because it was going to be in the sentence. And then here we have the phoneme grapheme practice, right, what spells R, E, S. These were all the ways they learned to spell S, E, U. I'm not sure if that was the consonant Y, or if I asked, say, what spells I at the end of a stressed syllable, because I doesn't come at the end of a word, so it would be a Y. O, and then we should have gone to the next line because it's a new category, but then we were doing some morpheme practice. So write the base element that means point or dot, P-U-N-C-T, as in punctuation or punctual. Write the twin bases that mean to hang, the prefix that means under. Write the main spelling of the prefix that means to or toward. And my prompt was write the prefix that means for or forward, which he confused with PER, which is, he should have put brackets around that. He didn't, but then he did get that. And notice that the R and the F and some S, a couple of other letters are different than we would teach them here in the United States, but that was making them as I had taught him, because that was the way he needed to be taught there. The prefix that means away or apart, in, into, or not, prefix that means back or again, down or away. Then he encoded tardy, and I asked him to encode and write student, and then to make the word student possessive. And that's the easiest way to do that. Write the word you want to make possessive, student, apostrophe S. Write the plural of student, students, make it possessive, then you simply add the apostrophe at the end. And then we're back to our write the base element that means point or dot, P-U-N-C-T, make that into an adjective that means on time or on the dot at the right time. Make that adjective into a noun, the twin bases to hang, and then write the word that would be an adjective that means that you're hanging on a thought. Make that word into an adverb that tells how. Anyway, you get the idea, but I wasn't dictating the words here. I was, or even the basis, I was going at it from meaning, because that's what morphology is all about. So then we had some more with the P-E-N-D, P-E-N-S-E, and then the sentence, and you see why you needed that capital T. The result of the tardy student's lack of punctuality was a suspension from recess for life. We were harsh. And then we've been practicing the ITS. So the it is contraction, the it's possessive, which does not have an apostrophe, which gives everybody trouble, whether English is your first language or not. And then a phrase hiding its bone, thinking it's a day off from class. And as you see, he still had a little trouble with it when we were practicing just the words themselves, but he remembered how to do it when he had the phrase. So, structured, systematic, cumulative, sequential. Presentation of the material, it's the logical order of the language. You also want to present the concepts that are most useful, that occur most often, which means the student will be able to read and spell the greatest number of words. The sequence begins with simplest, most basic concepts and elements and progresses systematically to the more difficult, but always building. Remember, everything new that you're learning is based upon what you already know. And the better you know it, the easier it's going to be to add on new concepts. So new concepts are related to previously taught concepts, skills, and information. And everything you present in anticipation of what's going to happen in the future. So you think about the words you're going to use so that you don't have to change it when you get to those new concepts. The way we learn new things, all new things, is by tying together parts of things we know already. So there's a lot that you can read on your own. The only thing I'm going to say here is the new concept or skill must be understood and usually related to prior knowledge or experience. Understood. We don't expect kids to be able to apply information that they don't understand, nor do we expect them to remember it for very long. They may be able to memorize it long enough to get it in an answer on a test, but if they don't understand it, it's not going to stick. Information then must be practiced or manipulated, used or applied numerous times in numerous contexts before it becomes ingrained, a little misreading there, becomes ingrained in the brain's long-term memory. I don't want them to imagine what they were supposed to remember. Okay, so let's think about prerequisites for teaching one English spelling convention that I've already mentioned once. So CK, when it's in angle brackets, that means it's what you would see. So that would be the grapheme. The CK spelling of k, what would a student need to know before I taught them that concept? They would need to know the consonant C, as in cat, is associated with k. They would also need to know that the consonant K, as in kite, is associated with the phoneme k. They would need to know the vowel graphemes in closed syllables, or the short vowel phoneme, or those vowel graphemes that spell the short vowel phoneme, which is vowel consonant. The vowel is not going to have a short sound if it isn't followed by a consonant. So here they are: A consonant, apple, a, E consonant, neck, eh. You could practice that. I can't see you, but just assume that I can. So write it: I consonant, iguana, I, O consonant, octopus, a, U consonant, umbrella, since this is the grapheme that you use to spell the phoneme k, when it comes immediately after a short vowel sound, they need to know what those short vowel sounds are. So previously taught multiple spellings of k, they need to know already that C is the default. You use C to spell k unless you have a reason not to use C. If you don't want to use the word default, you don't have to, but you do want them to understand that C is the way you spell k unless you have a reason to use something else. It's the most common. And here are some examples where you see the C spelling k. Now, this number 2 is perhaps one that you wouldn't teach right away, and you wouldn't have to teach this before you teach CK. But when you hear ick or ack at the end of a word with 2 or more syllables, you're going to spell it with IC or AC. And these are all 2 and 3 syllable words with only closed syllables. If you've taught them to read 2 syllable words with closed syllables, you could easily introduce that, or you could wait. It's not necessary to have done the ick and the ack before you teach CK, but you need to be aware of it in case it comes up. So then you also need to have taught them, when do you use K? If C is the one you use unless you have a reason not to, what's a reason to use K? Use K to spell k if it comes at the end of a word and it is not right after a short vowel phoneme. In milk, the k, what does the k follow? I'm assuming that you're responding, so humor me and move your mouths, okay? Or say it out loud, even if I can't hear you. Oh, and in bank, you have a consonant sound before the k. In dusk, the phoneme before k. That's right. S. In flake, The k follows a vowel sound, but it's not a short vowel sound. Ache, that's a long vowel sound. And the k is at the end in terms of the sounds. It's the last sound in flake, but it's not going to be a C because it's after a long vowel sound. Same thing for smoke. In mark, the k is after the R phoneme, and AR spells R phoneme. It also follows a consonant. In AW is a double vowel pattern, even though the W is only a vowel when it's with an A or an E. What is it? A. Which one did I forget? A, E, and O, right. But it's not a short vowel sound, so it's still a K. There's another R control, another W. Oh, I have hawk there twice, sorry. Look, is not one of those 5 short vowel sounds. Oak, Ike, long vowel sound, long vowel sound, long vowel sound, R controlled, R, and long vowel sound. So those are examples, because one of the things, if you read about teaching something, giving examples is important, but also giving non-examples. So these are places where you do use a C. These are places where you don't use a C, and the reason is because of those that we just talked about. So then you're ready. So use CK to spell K. Once you know those things on those last 2 slides, then you can teach them to use CK to spell K immediately after a short vowel phoneme. And it's usually at the end of a word. And here's an example where it's not at the end of the word, but it's at the end of the syllable, and the next letter is a vowel. You would never have CK and then a consonant unless it's a compound word. The other thing that to say here is when you're teaching your lesson, let me go back to this. So when you're teaching your lesson and you have your list of encoding words, you would have some words like the ones that are listed here, but they would have to be ones for the vowel graphemes that you've taught, obviously. So if you taught the AR and OR, but you hadn't taught the double vowel patterns, anyway, you choose words so you're not just giving them every one is going to be a CK. You want them to know why it's a CK and to be able to discriminate. But I mean, it could be with little ones. You would have a lesson where you do only have CK. That's where you have to look at what your students know and how they need to be challenged. But you definitely would not stop with that. You have to give them practice. Otherwise, they don't know how to use it in the real world. Okay. Okay. Practice, perhaps the best way to develop fluency in any endeavor, whether the endeavor is memorizing a musical score, mastering an athletic movement, learning a dance, or reading a text. But I still want to emphasize that memorizing, if you're memorizing most of these things, you're not just memorizing them without understanding them. Even an athletic movement, understanding why that movement is useful and in which context it's useful. Same thing for a dance or reading or music. Anything that you're learning, understanding is key. This is for your pleasurable reading when I'm not here. Practice makes permanent, but that means that you want to be certain that what you practice is what you want to become permanent. When students practice procedures they do not understand, there's a danger they'll practice incorrect procedures, thereby making it more difficult to learn correct ones. Each repetition or innovation that you give the students should build on the last so that the students are experiencing gradually more difficult applications. That would be, say, maybe your first lesson would focus on words that do end in CK and they tell you why. And then the next lesson would have some that end in K, some that end in CK, some that don't have it at the end at all, where they're having to use the knowledge of what they knew before. So you're gradually giving them chances with guidance and support to use those at more difficult steps. I know Mrs. Slingerland used to ask sometimes, I'm sure you get complaints about people saying that we have our kids practice too much. And she once said to me when she was explaining something, I just spent the morning out at the football field at the high school watching football practice. Do you know how many times those coaches have those boys practicing those plays over and over and over? And I'm not going to say that they were having a good time because it was probably 90 degrees if it was August, but we can't assume that because repetition looks boring to us, that it might not be as boring to a child. It might be. The fact is we still need to do it. So guided practice, that's practice with guidance from a teacher. So if there's something going wrong, you see it. It's a powerful instructional technique for helping students understand procedural knowledge at a conceptual level. And that understanding is the thing. Vygotsky hypothesized that a learner needs the most guidance when working in the zone of development in which he's not yet acquired the skill. And then as he becomes more able, he needs less scaffolding. That's the gradual release of responsibility. So what we call scaffolded instruction is guiding a learner through the shaping of a skill or process. Piaget, children cannot see, hear, or remember what they cannot understand. If the mental structures are not in place to support what is seen or heard, there will be no mental connection and consequently no memory for the information. And this is Russ Whitehurst, who was the first director of the Institute of Education Sciences. By failing to acknowledge that learning involves work, the United States may be placing a ceiling on the levels of proficiency that it can expect its students to achieve. From a football player, spectacular achievements are always preceded by unspectacular preparation. If we want children to understand and appreciate, sorry, I skipped that one for you to read. Descriptive studies, I know they were a long time ago, but Willingham's writing about it now in the context of his more recent research. Eminent scientists indicate that the most important factor for predicting their success is not innate talent or intelligence, but the willingness to work hard for extended periods of time. It is important. Working hard is important. The reason I'm looking, oh well, whatever it is, I'll have to get it later. Okay, so now we're to the multisensory multimodal part. So integration of auditory, visual, kinesthetic, motor. The nature of every oral and written language task requires integration of at least two modalities. So in silent reading, the stimulus, someone tell me, I hope somebody just said visual. Okay. So remember, it's silent reading, but what's happening in your head when you look at the words? For most of us, we're saying something, we're reading them out loud. We're saying something in our heads that go along with it. So for speaking, the stimulus is auditory. You think, even for a split second, what it is that you're going to say. And then from auditory to kinesthetic. And back to the silent reading a second, I didn't mention that there may be some kinesthetic motor there because some of our students do subvocalize. And if even very skilled readers, if reading something in another language or something on a topic that's very difficult, it may well be that you're subvocalizing and using that kinesthetic motor. So in this case, it would be auditory to kinesthetic at the very least, but you may not think about it as long as you wish you did. Okay, I could go on, but I think I need. So there's decades of clinical results support the efficacy of instruction that simultaneously associates those language modalities. And when we say kinesthetic motor, we're talking about speech and handwriting for supporting memory and learning. And it's both oral and written language, not just written. Back to our lesson plan, phoneme grapheme practice. So this is on the auditory side. And so I'm going to show you how that would be. So the demonstration would be, if I'm doing the auditory cards, well, I guess I have to turn this, unfortunately, I have to unshare my slides. I have to, well, I don't want to stop sharing. Can you see? I don't know how you're going to tell me. Sharing is, I don't want to stop the share. I just want to, but I don't want you to see my screen. Okay. So, all right. So if I say, what's, I have an order too. Okay. What spells t? The stimulus was auditory. Can you see, can somebody tell me if you can see me? Can somebody tell me what, well, I guess.
But we can see you.
Can you, okay, so can you see my hand?
Yes, if you hold it up.
Okay, now you can see it. Okay, thank you. Okay,
Yes.
so if I say, what did I say? What was my sound? I'll start over. What spells ooh? And you listen, auditory, and then your response would be, now I'm not the teacher anymore. Now I'm the kid. W, wagon, ooh. Then the teacher will turn it around. So the stimulus was auditory. The student's response was W, wagon, and then we gave the visual reinforcement. Okay. I might say, what spells dull at the end of a word? That's if they've learned the final stable syllable, obviously. What spells dull at the end of a word? The student's response would be D, L, E, dull. It's a final stable syllable. Then the teacher turns it around for the visual reinforcement. And then if you're in a class, the class could repeat, but I just want you to get the idea of the multisensory. So what spells k right after a short vowel sound, usually at the end of a word? And the student's response would be C, K, Jack, k, and then Joe. Now I could also have a yellow card where I had all three of them, but you could ask it in that way. Now, if assuming I've had them for a while, I say, what spells A? And as the student, I'm going to tell you what I know that spells A. A, consonant, silent E, safe A, I, rain A, Y, play A, and then again the teacher shows. Now if you've learned more ways than that, you would have more on the card. If you have only learned two of them, you'd have only two of them on the card. Okay, so now that was the phoneme grapheme. That was the auditory that you saw here on this side. Can you see my, you can't see my, you're going to have to go back to the lesson plan yourself because I'm not sure if you can see it. But that was auditory cards. Now I'm going to show you the visual cards. So in the visual, the stimulus, you show them. So you show them the card because it's a visual stimulus. The student's response is still U, consonant, umbrella, The next one. E, consonant, silent E, these E. S, H, ship, sh. Now what I'm doing, since I'm only one person, I'm being the teacher and being the kid, but so you have to use your imagination. E, consonant, elephant, F. So that would be here, grapheme phoneme, if you can see that screen. I don't know if you can. So now I'm going to go back to resume the screen share. And well, okay, this isn't working as well. It says, there we go. Resume share. And I might have to choose it all over again. So can you see my screen? Can somebody tell me, please? Can you see the presentation again?
Yeah, we can see the lesson plan format.
Okay, thank you. Sorry I have to keep asking all that, but I have no idea what's happening. Okay, so here's our lesson plan. We just did phoneme grapheme practice, and then we did grapheme phoneme practice. Okay. So you hear a lot about synthetic phonics and analytic phonics. Synthetic is usually, well, we're talking about deductive parts to whole. So when you blend the sounds together in decoding, that is synthetic because you're putting the sounds together and you end up with a word. So they would see the word slam. Now I'm going to try this again. I don't know. I don't know if you can tell me in order to use this draw function, if you can't see my screen, somebody needs to tell me, but I'm assuming that you can see it and you see a red dot under the letters SLAM. So in that case, I'm going to do some more of this, but just for here, I want you, so you see, I start with a visual whole and I look at that visual whole. I see one vowel grapheme. That means I have one syllable. A, leaves something to be desired. Consonant, a, and this is where the deductive part. S, ol, sol, a, sla, slam, slam. So I started with a visual whole. I took it apart and associated each visual part with an auditory part and ended up with the word slam, which was an auditory whole. So it was
Nancy, we didn't see the drawing, just so you know.
Okay, thank you. So then I guess that means I have to tell me, stay there at least until you, now can you see it?
No.
Can you see the dot zipping around?
I do not.
Okay, so let me try that again. Resume share. I think that just means if I resume share, it can only see me, but it can't see what I'm doing on the screen. And I can't do what I'm doing on the screen when it's in presentation mode. So that means I can't show you. I'm sorry. Okay, well, I'll just not be able to do that, but I'll go back to, I'll resume share, but I'll resume it. Well, now
I see drawings.
you see the drawing, but you don't see what.
You can see it now.
Not a grade A, but squiggly. Okay. Well, now you see there's the word that it went with, but I'm not going to do that because that would be too distracting. Kind of humorous though. Okay. All right. So, and analytic is the inductive hold aparts. That's when you're starting with that's when you're segmenting. Okay. So in that case for spelling, you start with, do I have my word there? Yeah. Hand. And that's in slash mark because I'm saying it. Hand. I say hand. Now you can see it, but you can't see my hand, but hand. And now I'm going to give the vowel sound first, a, and I'm writing it, a, consonant. Hand, and the first sound, H, I'm writing it and naming it. Hand, a, hand, n, hand, d. And then the whole thing, hand, H, A, N, D. Now the goal is for the student to be able to say hand and do most of those steps inside their head automatically. But when they're learning, if they're not doing it overtly, then I don't know what they're thinking. I need to know what they're thinking to be sure that they're using the procedure in order. I'm sorry that I can't show you what I was hoping to show you, but that's the way life goes these days sometimes. Okay. So the next goal, and I don't know what, well, I don't think there's a way I can, there must be a way I can. Okay, anyway, so here we have on the screen, you see decoding. And my goal there was to practice that with you right now. I'm going to try one more thing. I am screen sharing. If I stop the share, and then I get out of, because if I'm sharing my screen, you should be able to see what's on my screen, even if it isn't in presentation mode. And if that's the case, I'm only going to try it one more time. I won't waste any time. If it doesn't work this time,
That
then
is
we'll
correct.
move on. So right now you can't see my
You're
screen.
not sharing anything right now.
Okay, so now I'm gonna, where did it go? Oh, it's down at the bottom now. Okay, so share screen. Ah, I think it's gonna let me do it.
There you go.
Okay, so I draw. I'm sorry, I'm just laughing at what happened the last time. Okay. Okay, so you ready? I see one, you should say it with me, those of you who know. I see one vowel graphing, that means I have one syllable. A, consonant, a, s, l, sul, a, sla, slam. My word is slam. Now, again, I don't want my students to have to do this sul, a, sla forever. I want them to be able to do it, because if they're using that decoding strategy to proofread their spelling, they need to do that or they're not going to be aware when they've left something out. But for reading, I don't want them to have to do that overtly any longer than they need to be accurate. So let's do another one. I see one vowel graphing. That means I have one syllable. I, consonant, I, b, I, brick, brick. My word is brick. I would have my students use it in a sentence because I think it's important to be sure that they know the word they decoded and that I know that they know what it means. Up, that invention seems to have shrunk a bit. I see 1, 2, 3. Well, I see 2 vowel graphemes and a final stable syllable. That means I have 3 syllables. I look for 2 consonants between my first 2 vowel graphemes. I find 2, N and V, I divide between them. I divide before the TION because it's a final stable syllable. I, consonant, I, in, E, sorry, consonant, E, ven, in, ven, T, I, O, N, shun, invention, invention. I need a new invention that will allow me to do this so that my writing is more legible. Okay. Now, just to save a little time, I'm just going to let you see the screen here. So now I'm going to do encoding, and I don't know what you're going to see. We'll find out in a second. We already did hand, but now you can, I don't know, you can see my screen, but you can't see me. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay, so I kind of hate to do this, but I'm going to stop the share so you can see just for this one. I'll do strep. Okay, so now you can see me, right? I'm going to assume that answer to that question is yes. Strep, strep. I hear one syllable. Strep, E, consonant. Strep, S. Strep, T. Strep, R. Strep, E. Strep, P. Strep. Sorry, I had to cross that T. Strep, S, T, R, E, P. And then I was writing in cursive, so I couldn't cross my T until the end. And then, of course, you have the writing steps. So now I'm going to go back to sharing. Maybe. Where is sharing go? Where are you sharing? Okay. And, well, I want to share with the actual presentation now, so I have to find it. Okay. Now I have to do sharing after I did that. maybe I didn't have to do it that way. Sorry. Share. Share. Okay. You are now, okay, so that means that you should be seeing this. Okay, and you are. Okay, so back to Dr. Orton in 1937. This is one of the things that, one of his big takeaways from working with those students that he's first worked with over those first 10 years. We have so far been able to recognize only one factor common to the entire group: difficulty in repicturing or rebuilding in the order of presentation sequences of letters, of sounds, or of units of movement. So that would be orthographic patterns that you see, that we see, sounds or phonemes that we hear and feel. We perceive them both from listening and pronunciation. And that would also be included in the units of movement, but so would letters for writing. But the units of movement could be for speech or for writing. So the building blocks: automatic letter recognition is key to automatic word recognition. At-risk students need more than 20 times the practice other students need. And this is a new little diagram that I've just come across, and it's by Willingham. And he talks about these letters that we see, but they're translation rules. There's some translation rules for turning those letters or groups of letters, the graphemes, into phonemes, but then there are also rules for those letters becoming graphemes. And there's a reciprocal relationship between the phonemes and the graphemes and the graphemes and the phonemes. Likewise, you get meaning from the pronunciations. You also get meaning visually from looking at some of the orthographic patterns, including the morphemes. But it's being aware of that, being aware of those relationships, he feels provides a deeper level of understanding for teachers, so that if a teacher has a model of reading in her head or his head, like a complex clockwork, she or he can predict what will happen to the system as a whole when a part of it changes in some way. Or if a student doesn't understand, where did the understanding go? What could he do? That goes back to those questioning and the eliciting that we talked about earlier. What can he do? When can he do it? What's the difference when he has trouble? What is involved that wasn't involved before? And try to figure that out. So this goes back just to learning and practice. You see the human language cortex at birth, and at 6 years old, neurons exactly the same. It's the connections and the learning from oral language that have occurred over that amount of time. And Beth Slingerland's model, understanding and speaking, comes before reading. And of course, it's eventually leads to more complex verbalized expression. Reading then enriches verbalized expression. Verbalized expression precedes written expression, and both verbal and written expression come together for that complete auditory visual kinesthetic language function, which you see in the outline of the lesson plan. And you see why it's important to look from the single unit all the way down. So this just shows the activation of certain parts of the brain during each of these individual tasks. When I was showing this to a group of fourth graders, the comment, I was sitting on the rug with them, and one little guy he says, "Ooh, look at that one where it's dripping out." I assured him that that was not really dripping out. But we talk about when you're hearing, when you're seeing, when you're speaking, when you're thinking, what if they were all on top of each other? Then those connections that we just saw here would be occurring when you are hearing, seeing, speaking, and thinking all at the same time. So that auditory visual kinesthetic for both speech and writing, and it's that simultaneous association, not doing each of the things separately, but together. And that's why those in the Venn diagram, they're overlapping, they're not separate. You're not looking at it and then hearing it. And that's why you want kids to name the letter as they're writing it, not afterwards. So Marilyn Adams has a comment on multimodal teaching. Information processing research provides the basis for an importance of practice and repetition in developing fluent and accurate retrieval. and understanding how learning moves from short to long-term memory and how weak neural pathways can be strengthened or new neural pathways can be developed to bypass problem areas. Multimodal instruction strengthens weak neural pathways and new neural pathways are developed. Deeper processing enables the learner to retrieve from multiple places in the brain. This was a student I used to see him early in the morning before he went to school. And he would spend 5 minutes each morning, or not, at least one of the 2 mornings a week, writing a journal. And he was doing a bit of a minimalist job. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him and he looked up and he reacted to my look by saying, I was just trying to kill one rock with 2 birds. So sometimes word retrieval gets us into trouble. We talked both of the other 2 sessions about triple word form theory, only again to emphasize phonological, orthographic, morpheme awareness. They're all important. We need to learn how each one of them works, but most importantly, we need to know how to integrate the information. Same thing here, phonological and the orthographic are being integrated here, and then all of those are being integrated with a semantic pathway. Most of you are familiar with Sally Shaywitz's 2003 book, and it's just been revised. I'm not sure whether it was this year or last year. The brain's reliance on patterns of connectivity may have particular relevance to the teaching of reading, since within these systems, patterns of neural connections are continually reinforced and strengthened as a result of repeated practice and experiences. And again, we don't want to practice mistakes. So what we practice is what we're going to be habitually doing, for better or for worse. So preparation for reading on the visual side is the first part of comprehension, although decoding and knowing what the words mean that they've decoded definitely also has to do with comprehension. So fluency too often is considered simply to be words correct per minute. And you can read this on your own, but the most important takeaway is that fluency is accuracy, automaticity, and oral reading prosody. And together they help students to comprehend. There may be a reciprocal relationship between prosody and comprehension. Most researchers at this point believe there are. There's plenty to read on those topics. But the most important thing is don't focus on speed. So when that part of the lesson plan is teaching students that phrases answer questions, and they answer the same questions, whether they're narrative text or expository text. A phrase answers very simple question because a phrase acts as a part of speech. Same for clauses. You also can bring their attention to the purpose of punctuation and syntactical relationships, how words affect words, how an adjective modifies a noun, how a word may modify a phrase to clause, clause to sentence. So you're intellectualizing. You're not teaching them to memorize all the prepositions. What point is it to know what all the prepositions are if you don't know what prepositions do? So what does a preposition do? It answers a question. A preposition is always part of a phrase, and a prepositional phrase is either going to act like an adjective or an adverb, just the way a single word adverb or adjective, and it answers adverb or adjective questions. Then you need to know what word does it answer the question about. So these are the questions. And speed is not the road to success. Careful practice is the road to speed. We go faster than we can be careful and accurate. Chances are what we're practicing isn't what we want to remember. So this is a passage, make sure I've got Tyrannosaurus, about Tyrannosaurus Rex. And you see in orange the phrases that I've just highlighted or put in orange, the phrases that I chose to take out to pre-teach to students before we read the passage. And what did I base that on? Well, I chose content words that the students might be able to decode, but they might not know what they mean, even though they're able to decode them. I know if they can decode them because I've taught them I know what they can decode because I've taught them. There may be unpredictable content words that aren't decodable given their current level of information. There may be high frequency function words that they have, because every sentence has function words in it. There's certain ones of those that they have to be able to read in order to read sentences, practicing those in the phrases. Or ambiguous language, words with multiple meanings, or words that are in a context that's unusual for this passage. Parts of speech. I might not be using the names for the parts of speech depending upon what grade, and I wouldn't say find the prepositional phrase. That's pointless. But find the phrase that tells where or when or why. That's not pointless because that has to do with comprehension. So you're choosing, again, single unit to clarify pronunciation. Mrs. Slingerland makes the point, new content vocabulary is retained more securely when associated with its meaning within a phrase than if you taught it as just a standalone word. You're also getting practice with the orthographic patterns, but in this case, we're talking about comprehension. So these are the phrases listed. Okay, I'm going to come back to this. These are the phrases that you saw in orange. And these are the steps that we're going to use to, they're called preparation for reading. Now, I could have chosen single words too, but I knew I wouldn't have time to do both. I'm sorry, I have to do one thing very quickly here. Okay, I can see that I am quickly running out of time. I'm sure no one is surprised, least of all me. Okay, so I have a choice here. These are the steps. So I'm not gonna go over the steps with you. I'm just gonna do them with you. So when I want you to, if you have a ruler or something that you can put under the phrase, rather than go back and forth between the share and not share, which is going to take too long, I want you to visualize me with a rule, with these phrases on a whiteboard and with a ruler under it. And I'm going to read it. I want you to repeat his enormous tail. Now I would want you to use an arm swing, which again, I can't show you because you can't see me right now. So next one, I'm underlining the next one. I'm going to say it. I want you to repeat. But where you need to look if you're reading it, at the phrase, their best chance. Repeat, their best chance. Alive at that time. And I hear you saying alive at that time. With dagger-like teeth. Repeat, with dagger-like teeth. Notice that there's a dash or a hyphen between dagger and like, because those two words together are describing teeth. And that's the reason that hyphen is there, that dash is there. With dagger-like teeth. Repeat again, with dagger-like teeth. In another direction. The biggest meat eater. Repeat. Tyrannosaurus's easiest prey. Now, in this case, we have an apostrophe S because the prey belongs to Tyrannosaurus. And this word prey is EY. It has to do with what the Tyrannosaurus is eating, what he eats, not praying as you would in church. The dreaded king of the earth. Repeat, the dreaded king of the earth. Also notice that earth has a capital because it's a proper noun. It names our planet, just like Tyrannosaurus has a capital because it's the name of the dinosaur. Okay, the next step would be find, and I would choose one out of any one that's here, but not in the order that they're here. And so this, now first the stimulus was visual, but now I'm going to say find their best chance. So a student would come up, underline it, read their best chance, and if he's correct, the rest of the students would repeat. And you would do that for all of them but not in the same order. And the third step, which you can look back at later, would be from clues. So find the phrase that tells how. So one phrase that would tell how would be with dagger-like teeth. So the student has to figure out from my clue which phrase it is, read the phrase, and then if the rest of the class agrees that that is the correct phrase and that the student read it correctly, they repeat. And the last one is to read all of the phrases and read each one. A student would come up and read all of them, and the class again would repeat if they're correct or not. Okay, so these are examples of clues. You always want to have, you try to have a where, what, why, when, but you also sometimes have a word in there that is a vocabulary word that you're focusing on. And I don't feel good about how this is going because I know that if you didn't understand when we started, you probably still don't, but I don't know what else to do given the time we have and the technology lacking in me. So this is the passage again, and I'm going to now give you some clues. So once we've done that pre-teaching of the vocabulary and we've practiced the phrases, then the students are ready to read it. But I'm not just going to say read it. I'm going to do, wait a second. Okay, there are 4 steps or stages that are here. Again, you can go back and what we're going to be doing is just step 1, and we're not going to be doing all of them. So read the first 2 words. They're the name of them. They're the name. It's also the same as the title of this story. And so what did you read? Tyrannosaurus Rex. The next word is a verb. Read it. Was. Put those together. Tyrannosaurus Rex was what? The biggest meat eater is what you would have said. I'm trying, maybe I should use a different voice. The biggest meat eater. Next 3 words, ever to walk where? On earth. Read those 2 phrases together. Ever to walk on earth. Read the whole sentence, but let me hear the phrases. That would be, I might say, study that first sentence aloud now and remember to read it in phrases. So I would want you to, each one of you is reading it on your own and I'm reading it with you, but I wouldn't be doing that in class. You would be doing it alone. Tyrannosaurus Rex was the biggest meat eater ever to walk on earth. The next sentence begins with the pronoun he. Who do you think he's referring to? That's right, Tyrannosaurus Rex. Next word, verb, was. Together, he was what? The king of his world. Now, some students would just read the king. And if they did, then you would say, what kind of king? Of his world. Now put those 2 together. The king of his world. Either is correct because of his world is an adjective phrase that's describing king. Okay, so, and then study aloud. He was the king of his world. Okay, again, that's not much, but it's a little piece. And then you see here, that was preparation for reading when we did the phrases reading from the book. And these, I've included questions that if we structured the first and second paragraphs, I just structured the first one. And then I might have one student study the first paragraph, the whole paragraph aloud. Always reread every sentence and you always reread every paragraph because you're taking it apart, but you're always putting it back together. And then there are questions here. And so I ask the questions and study aloud the sentence in the text that contains the evidence for your answer. So I might, the question, how many legs did T-Rex have? How do you know? They have to go back into the text and then find the exact sentence that answers that question and reread the whole sentence again. So they're getting lots of practice with rereading without my ever saying rereading, except sometimes. Anyway, these are just examples. Okay, and then you don't do that forever. Just like with the decoding, you don't have them soul at forever. You have them do that until they can do it, and then they know when they need to and when they don't. But there's more and more independence. So again, it's gradual release of responsibility. And within the same passage, you may be doing more than one of these things with the same story. So within a visual lesson, you had the grapheme phoning practice at the single grapheme level, decoding practice at the single word level, preparation for reading at the phrase level, and then structured reading, connected text level. So every part of the lesson plan progressively becomes a little more complex and bigger. And as this was a comment from a student I'd worked with for several years. Actually, remember last year, the guy who did about the baseball, he breaks down his words. He breaks down his pitches the way he learned to decode words. Well, this is the same kid, but this was when he was in 7th grade. And it was the last time I was going to be working with him. And he read a Greek myth. He did a really nice job. And I complimented him, told him what I really thought he did well. And he looked up at me. He says, well, you know, Ms. White, once you know those prepositions, you can see them coming. I couldn't have paid somebody to come up with a quote that good. Anyway, but as you see, he was thinking a lot more than that. Okay, so the diagnostic teaching comes into just every single response your student makes is giving you information about what they do know, what they don't know, what they need more practice with, what they're becoming more automatic with. It's continuous and ongoing. And of course, you have to do some more objective things also, but every lesson is based upon the one that came before. And this is, you're about to see another lesson. So this is an auditory lesson for a student. He practiced his letter connections. Then he practiced phoneme grapheme, dictation. And in this case, I said, write all the ways you know to spell k. Circle the one that you would use right after a short vowel sound, usually at the end of a word. Draw 2 lines, draw 1 line under the Greek spelling of k. Draw 2 lines under the way you would choose to spell k, unless you had a reason not to. And then we had some words with suffixes, using the 1-1-1 doubling rule, phrases, and then a sentence. This is another high school student, but I'm going to go actually past this because I want to get to the end. So to ensure that all children have access to effective reading instruction, we must ensure that their teachers have both the deep content knowledge and the principles of instruction. So phonics, phonology is up there underneath deep content knowledge. So it should be okay on your handout. I hope so. Morphology, syntax, semantics. I can't, sorry. I'm sorry, I just can't do it. I gotta show it to, I gotta make this smaller. Now the content knowledge is gone, but I can live without that, okay. Okay, I can live without the, okay, so phonology, phonics, syllables, morphology, syntax and semantics, systematic, cumulative, explicit, multimodal, diagnostic. Evidence-based key elements of structured literacy work together, understanding and integration, and comprehensive and deep. Evidence-based instructional principles guide the teaching of structured literacy content. It works because of all the pieces. When I was doing my dissertation, I kept being told, but you need to choose the little piece that makes it work. It's not the little piece that makes it work. It's all the little pieces working together that make it work. So again, you can remember the product proofing that Margie Gillis was recommending, so that choose the appropriate approach, then get the necessary training to deliver it with fidelity, the intensity, the duration, and of course, the goal is efficacy and independent functional use. And this isn't just functional use of decoding to decode spelling. And it works, and they find mistakes. Know your stuff, know whom you're stuffing, stuff every minute of every lesson. Even if you have technology glitches, do your best, keep going. Knowledge and practice standards. And this is, I mean, some of you may have to leave. I don't, because I can't find my phone. I'm probably sitting on it. I don't know what time it is. I know it's almost time is up, but I do want to read this sort of as a way to end our time together. And this is a statement that was written by a student to the MCAT board requesting extended time. And it's long, but I think it's helpful. So if you do have time to listen to it, and I'll read as fast as I can. Dear Office of Accommodated Testing, I'm a graduate of Stanford University where I utilize the help of the Office of Accessible Education to achieve academic success. I've been learning to cope with dyslexia since the age of 8, yet all the compensatory mechanisms at my disposal now do not allow me to demonstrate my abilities if I'm not allotted the time needed to apply these strategies. Thus, I am thankful for your time in evaluating my request for accommodations, time plus 50% on the MCAT. In second grade, we had fourth grade reading buddies. We would meet up with our reading buddies, take out a book, and begin to read. Every week, my older mentor read aloud to me. One week, when my usual buddy was absent, I was assigned a substitute. He opened the book and looked at me expectantly. After a pause, he asked, "Well, aren't you going to read?" I considered the question, studied the words and the pictures on the page, looked back up at the boy, and responded, "Sorry, I don't know how." He patiently tried to help me sound out a few words. However, frustrated that I required help with all but the most simple and common words, he gave up fairly quickly. He read the story to me instead. From the time I entered first grade, I remember thinking I was as smart as anyone else. I excelled in math and science, and although my handwriting was notably atrocious and I struggled with spelling, I thought I could read the stories in our textbook as well as anyone else. Sure, I often mixed up the order of words. I omitted or added a few words and phrases here and there, but I had more or less memorized all of our stories. In fact, I could recite many verbatim to my sisters who were falling asleep at night. No book necessary. It seems that I had fooled my teachers, my parents, and myself, and I continued to fool them through second and most of third grade. My mother had seen the keen interest I took as we explored science museums. She was impressed at the amount of information I absorbed and what I was able to repeat back to her, weeks, even months later. Yet I was a middle-of-the-road student. Concerned, she took up the issue with my teachers. The principal explained to my mother that her son was a very nice, perfectly acceptable, but very average student. Towards the end of third grade, my parents decided something needed to be done. My teacher insisted that I did not require any special attention, that I was doing just fine in school, but my parents expected more, so they decided to have me tested for a learning disability. The impact the evaluation had on my life is something that will never vanish. I imagine that if you were to tell the average 8-year-old that he had a problem, a disability that he would need to cope with forever, he would be distraught. He would argue, deny such accusations, cry, and insist that everything was fine, that he was normal. I did not. Even as an 8-year-old, I appreciated finally understanding how I was different from my peers and what it was that made reading, writing, and spelling such arduous processes. I was overjoyed that I now had not only a name, dyslexia, for the once seemingly insurmountable obstacle I had dealt with for my entire life in school, but also a path to overcome it. My parents warned me that nothing would come easy, and I've accepted that as a simple fact of life ever since. Soon after my diagnosis, I began thrice weekly educational therapy sessions. I awoke around 5:45 in the morning and set off for my 6:30 a.m. hour-long appointment. I learned to decode words by breaking them into syllables. I learned to approach reading one word at a time, analyzing unfamiliar-looking words to uncover what the symbols, which is to say letters, coded for. More often than not, it was a word that already existed in my vocabulary. I learned Latin and Greek prefixes, base elements, and suffixes in order to decipher the meaning of new words, and I practiced writing in huge invisible letters with my arm outstretched in order to improve my handwriting. I parsed sentences, labeling each word with its grammatical part of speech. I did all this to catch up on material that my classmates already intrinsically understood. In addition, I attended 2-month-long Slingerland summer school programs, which further helped my reading, writing, and spelling skills. I worked hard in school, and I continued thrice weekly academic language therapy through 6th grade. Though it wasn't easy to explain to my friends why I was late for middle school 3 times a week, it was all worth it because by the end of all the extracurricular learning, I was at the top of my class in just about every subject. I continued to achieve through high school and college. I graduated from Stanford University with a 3.897 GPA. Though the long road of learning to cope with my dyslexia has led me to become a better student and a better rounded individual, the organizational and problem-solving strategies I employ to compensate for my disability are not without limitation. The most notable functional limitation I have today is my slow processing speed. Though I can comprehend just about anything I set out to read, I know it will take me longer than anyone would expect, perhaps more time than most would be willing to put in. Even if I'm reading a simple article with a friend, I have to ask him to pause before scrolling down or turning the page because I always read significantly more slowly than my peers. When I encounter a new word, especially if the word is 3 syllables or longer, I will in time correctly read and understand it, but it'll take me 10 seconds rather than the 3 seconds it seems to take everyone else. In group settings, when I take a survey, fill out paperwork or a questionnaire, or read through text, I finish last. I know this about myself and I accept it because I realize this is what I must do to complete the task and understand it as well as my peers. My disability extends beyond reading and certainly beyond test taking. I'm typically happy to scribe, either writing or typing, but I'm not the fastest. I go slowly to avoid mistakes. If I do not take my time, the quality of my work decreases drastically. Even when working as a whitewater rafting guide, an occupation that few consider an intellectual pursuit, I disagree, but it would take me another 3 pages to demonstrate otherwise. I find that I need more time than others, even guides with less experience and fewer skills. I rig my boat more slowly than the rest, but I tie everything down well. I know where each item on my boat is located, and I ensure every strap and line exists for a purpose. Academic life isn't all that different. Do something deliberately and suitably the first time, so you need not waste time to correct your work later down the road. If I am granted the extended time accommodation, specifically time plus 50%, that I've been using since I was in the 4th grade, an accommodation I believe I need, I will use it to go at the pace I need to in order to work both efficiently and effectively. That is to say, I will take enough time to truly understand each question as I answer it, and I will subsequently answer to the best of my ability. I believe that on the MCAT, as on the exams I took throughout middle school, high school, and college, I need this extended time to accurately portray the level at which I understand the material and what I can achieve, not the level at which I achieve when forced to rush through every problem and still not finish. The regular time allotted is the time I take to recall the knowledge base I've built over the last decade, or to synthesize the new information presented to me with my existing knowledge, and then answer the questions. The extended time is the time I require because of my slow reading and processing speeds. It's the time I use to employ the strategies I've learned over 2 decades of coping with my dyslexia. I do not ask for an unfair advantage on the MCAT, only a level playing field on which I can demonstrate to medical schools that I'm a talented student worthy of the opportunity to train as a physician. Thank you for taking the time to read and consider my application for extended time. And he got it. He got the extended time. And I don't know if anybody's still there, but okay. Any questions? Or, oh, well, that's not too bad. 6:33, even with all the technical difficulties. Okay.
Hello.
Thank you. I gotta go. It's about to crash. Look at this crash.
Oh. Hi, guys.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. Thank you for everything that you've shared.
Wait, thank you for hanging in there. I'm sorry that today, I really did want to show some more of the strategies than I was able to, but
You hung in there and you did a nice job. I would like to see the other slides though that aren't on the handout.
Well, the only things that I don't have in the handout are work samples, because I just don't share those because I feel like,
Yeah, of course.
and I mean, if it's sometimes it's something that somebody gave me permission to share in a presentation, but not to give out. But if there's something specific, I think most everything else was actually, there was more in the handout than you saw in the presentation, because I had to go back. And you must thank Ruth for that, because Ruth told me I needed to prune a bit more after I sent the handout. What I do without her, I don't know.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.